Raid Shadow Legends is, of course, constantly moving forward, whether that be new content or new champions or buffs or, nerfs to champions, all that sort of good stuff. So with everything that's going on in the game, it can often be hard, especially for some of the larger CCs or the more spend-friendly players, to remember that at the end of the day, we are still going to have a lot of new players checking out the game, a lot of new players who might not be spending so much, and a lot of new players who might be struggling with content. So with that premise in mind, I'm going to be walking you through how to beat Stage 20 of the Fire Knight's Castle, and some tips and some substitutions for the team that I'm going to show you here today. We're going to be talking about what you want to bring for the boss and all those sorts of good things. So let's go ahead, let's hop over to the dungeon here and see what's going on. That being said as well, make sure that you like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to check out more Raid Shadow Legends content. I'm definitely going to be trying to put out a lot more, early game friendly stuff for Stage 20 dungeons and those sorts of things. I do have a secondary free-to-play account myself that I'm trying to progress as well, so it's kind of cool to see that juxtaposition versus my account that I've been playing for like 4 years total. And spent probably about $500-600 on it at this point versus my account where I spent nothing and I've only been playing it for about 6 months or so. It's a very, very cool difference, that's for sure. So what does the Fire Knight do? Well, he's going to be Force Affinity, first of all, for Stage 20. So Force Affinity means that ideally you're going to want to try and bring yourself Spirit Champions and Force Champions, right? Because your Magic Champions are going to have the chance to weak hit, essentially, which means that they're not going to do damage, and they're also not going to apply any effects that they might have on their skills. So decreased speed, turn meter reduction, those sorts of things don't get applied if your champion weak hits. That being said, Void Champions, you're good to bring them essentially any stage just because they can't weak hit. The Fire Knight's skills, he attacks all enemies, destroys enemy max HP by 15% of the damage dealt, so ideally you don't want to be soaking up a lot of hits from this guy. He attacks all enemies, places a decreased speed, and this is the important part here that will catch a lot of players. So the Cloak of Fire, he starts the battle with a Divine Shield. While active, the shield reduces the damage he receives by 80% and prevents him receiving any debuffs or being affected by any other skill effects. So again, think of your poisons, any debuffs, turn meter reduction, all those sorts of things do not apply while his shield is up. The shield cannot be removed from skills that remove buffs. Each hit decreases the strength of the shield, and the shield will be broken when hit enough times. Now, if he starts a turn with the shield active, he will attack all enemies one time. The attack will destroy each enemy's max HP. So essentially, you don't want to have him having the shield up when he's taking turns because he's going to get an extra smack on you. At Stage 20, I don't recall the amount of shield stacks that he has off the top of my head, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to throw a footage on screen here now of me actually beating it with this particular team. And you can see how many stacks he has inside that video since you're going to be fighting Stage 20 anyways. Now, let's talk about the champions, right? And what do they bring to the table? So first of all, one of the champions that every newer player is going to want to get themselves is an Apothecary. This guy's fantastic. He's important because he has a 3-time hitter on the A1. When you have any sort of multiple hitters and it says random, that means that it's all essentially just going to be funneled right into the Fire Knight because, of course, he's the only enemy in the battle. Apothecary also has an increased speed as well as a turn meter fill with a very, very good base speed of 106. And then, of course, he does have a heal if you need to make use of that as well. We also have Belor, who I actually did a standalone champion showcase on. So if you're not too familiar with Belor or why he's so good, I'd recommend going and checking that out. A1 AoE, chance to block active skills. A2 AoE, small decreased speed rather. And an A3 AoE, the small versions of decreased attack and decreased defense. Now you'll notice I do actually have him in this particular blessing. We'll talk about that in a few moments. We do, of course, have Cold Heart as well. She has a 4-times hitter on the A1 with a heal reduction. And then her big money skill is her Heart Seeker, which is going to have the decreased turn meter by 100% and also has an extra 30% chance of inflicting a critical hit. So you only really need to build her with 70% crit rate, which is pretty fantastic. And she does have okay base stats for a rare as well. We also have Tree Shield Knot, who is going to be able to come in and revive your team if needed. He also has a heal as well as an increased defense, and he does have a triple hitter with a decreased attack on the A1 as well, so you can see this guy's utility for something like Fire Knight. And then lastly, we do have an epic champion in the roster. This is going to be Ruella. Again, I've made a standalone showcase on her. She has an enemy attack 3 times on the A1. Each critical hit has a 100% chance of stealing 5% of the target's turn meter, so obviously you want her built with full crit. Her A2 is another big money skill, attacks 3 times, each hit having a 75% chance of placing a decreased defense, a weaken, and a decreased speed, which is absolutely fantastic. She's bringing you 3 of the quintessential debuffs that you want for doing damage against these bosses. And then, of course, her A3 is going to fill the turn meters of all allies by 20% and place a 30% increased crit rate buff on all allies for 3 turns. So, let's go ahead and take a look at their gearing so you can kind of get an idea of how things look that way. Now, obviously, these champions have awakenings, and these champions have some sort of empowerments, so keep that in mind. It definitely does make the stat thresholds a little bit easier to hit. If you can't meet these stats quite yet, that's perfectly fine. You're not going to need to meet these stats to clear the stage. You can see how easily we cleared the stage, right? So even if you have lower stats, you're still going to be able to do it. It's just going to take a little bit longer. Just focus on progressing your Great Hall bonuses. Farming arena is how you do that, right? And then focus on getting better gear, even if temporarily you have to drop down and farm some different stages, right? A big recommendation would be making sure to do your faction wars so you can get perception sets. That's going to help out a lot. Now, with Ruella, how is she built? Well, she is fully booked, and I do have her in the Phantom Touch Mastery, so she's going to have a 75% chance of doing an extra hit of damage, which does count as an extra hit as far as the shield goes. When we go into the Fire Knight's Castle, these are how her stats are looking. So 274 on the speed, 106 crit rate, 258 crit damage, 409 accuracy, as well as 5100 attack. Now keep in mind, these stats are astronomical. I am a very late game player. You can definitely lower these, right? So for accuracy, for example, you're really only going to need 200 accuracy, maybe more, 250 would be better just to make it a little bit more consistent. And then realistically, your speed, as long as you're faster than the boss and you can take at least 1 turn, you should be good to go. So that being said, this is how some of the gear looks on her, right? So we have speed, attack, and crit rate and all those sorts of good things because she is a very competent damage dealer. Now for Belor, his stats are definitely suffering a little bit more because I did prioritize a stun set. So we got 41k HP. Again, I'll show you the Fire Knight's Castle. So 43k HP, 2400 defense, 3000 attack, 271 on the speed. We want him going nice and quick. And then we have, again, 400 on the accuracy. Now, one important thing with him is you notice that he has the small version of decreased speed as well as the small version of decreased attack and defense. If at all possible, what I would recommend is to go ahead and run him inside the Nature's Bounty. Obviously, the higher awakening of this, the blessing that you have, the better. This is essentially going to have a chance to place the greater version of a debuff. So, for example, a big version of a decreased speed instead of the small, or the big version of a decreased attack or decreased defense. So that is a quite nice blessing for him. Cold Heart, we of course have built out inside Phantom Touch as well. Phantom Touch is a fantastic blessing to try and run on Fire Knight if you can. I do actually have her in a refresh ring. I probably have more refresh accessories that I could try and put on her now as well, so I might have to do that at some point. Refresh, of course, having a 5% chance to prevent a skill cooldown. As far as the skills go, she's fully booked. And then for gear, I do also have her in a reflex set as well. These are how the stats are looking. So 72% crit rate. Again, her A3 has a 100% chance to inflict a critical with this, right? So it has an extra 30%. 190 speed, so she is very slow, all things considered, but realistically, this is as fast as you need her. 372 on the accuracy, again, enough to get the job done. And then 3600 on the attack, though you're not focusing on building her for attack. As you can see, I actually have a defense chest plate on her, right? Just because she doesn't really benefit from attack. Her skills are based on attack, but she's not going to really scale well enough to actually make it worth it. You essentially just want her to stay alive and do her Heartseeker, which, if you'll notice, is based on the enemy max HP. Now, for Tree Shield Not, he's built out essentially just as a tank. So we have 55,000 roughly HP, 4,300 defense, 251 on the speed, 209 on the accuracy, and 318 on the resistance. Now, having him in fairly high resistance is quite nice so that he can resist debuffs that are thrown your way and those sorts of things, especially if you have a lower gear threshold and you have to revive your champions and stuff like that. Having your reviver not get CC'd is going to be absolutely fantastic. And then we do also have Apothecary in the mix as well. So Apothecary is built out like so. He's going to have 47,000 HP, 3,700 defense, 264 speed, and then 258 accuracy. He doesn't really need accuracy whatsoever. This is essentially just residual accuracy that I got from, for example, my area bonuses, as well as my classic arena bonuses, like the affinity bonuses, right? So those aren't needed, but that being said, you don't really need to build him with accuracy at all. He's not placing any debuffs, so I wouldn't recommend prioritizing it in any way. And I do actually have Miracle Heal on him. That way, if he's healing somebody with his A2, he's essentially going to have a chance to go ahead and restore some of that max HP that might get destroyed as well, which is especially important if for some reason you're bringing in, say, for example, a HP-based nuker like a Magna or someone like that, right? In terms of masteries, he's built out in Giant Slayer. Tree Shield Knot is built out essentially in just full resistance build, as well as defense there. I did get some defense boosting, and I do actually have Flawless Execution for increased crit damage on my Coldheart. If you don't want to build her in Flawless Execution, I would say Giant Slayer would be a fantastic way to go, considering that she has a 4x hitter on the A1. Counterattack masteries are also decent on her, depending on where you're using her. I do have Fearsome Presence on my Bellower, so that he has a increased chance of placing the stuns from his stun set. So the regular stun set just gives us an 18% chance. This is going to boost it by 5%, so it's going to take us to a 23% chance, which is pretty big. You'll see that the stun set procced quite a bit when we were running him through. And then with Ruella for masteries, I have her built out with Giant Slayer. Of course, all of her hits that actually do damage are 3x hitters, so Giant Slayer just makes the most sense. Let's go ahead. Let's talk about some substitutions. So really, the primary roles that you're bringing for this are going to be multi-hit turn meter decreasing champions, right? So we have Ruella, multiple hits decreases turn meter. We have not multiple hits. We have Bellower, who is not multiple hits, but he's the only champion in the team that doesn't have multiple hits, and he's essentially just bringing so much other control that he is still needed. We have Apothecary, again, multiple hits on the A1, turn meter boost. And then, of course, Coldheart, who has the 4 hits on the A1, as well as turn meter control. So with those things in mind, who are some other champions that you can bring? Well, if you've been playing long enough and you completed the Xenogre Blademaster Fusion, I do actually highly recommend her. I've done a review on her, and I've showcased her into my Fire Knight Hard team as well, so I do still use her to farm Fire Knight Hard, so you can rest assured that she's going to get use even in late or end game, team compositions, so you're not wasting your resources by building her. And I don't even have her booked inside my team, so that's something to consider. She brings an ally speed in dungeons by 30%, so that is absolutely fantastic, right? And her A2 is the big money, essentially, which attacks one enemy 4 times, each hit increasing her turn meter by 5%, and placing an increased speed on all allies for 2 turns. So having a multiple hitter with an increased speed on your team is absolutely fantastic. All of her skills are multi-hit, right? She's looking at 3 hits at the minimum, essentially. Another great call out is going to be from the Dwarves. So again, if you were able to complete this fusion, or if you've pulled this champion, Newt is going to be absolutely fantastic. Newt not only has a 3x enemy max HP nuke on the A3, he's also going to have a 3x turn meter decrease by 15% for a total of 45%, which is absolutely ridiculous. So he can certainly help out. If you have her, another epic option is going to be, of course, Allure. Allure is kind of the OG turn meter control option for the Fire Knight, right? So she attacks 3 times at random, decreases a target's turn meter by 25% on each critical hit. So if you have her built out with full crit, she's going to decrease it by 75%, which is insane. The one thing to consider for Fire Knight 20 at least is she is actually weak affinity, so quite often you're probably going to have weak hits land, which of course, as we mentioned, means that your turn meter reduction effects aren't going to land as well. Another option that we have for epics is actually going to be Deacon Armstrong. So Deacon Armstrong has this turn meter fill and decrease, as well as an extra turn on his A3. He brings you that decreased defense, and he does also have a multiple hitter with a leech on the A1, which is quite nice. There's a lot of champions that you can bring in. Of course, if you had the fusion done, you can use Armands just for his turn meter reduction, right? He's going to make sure that the clan boss, the Fire Knight rather, never goes. Another underrated option actually is going to be Syl. I use Syl for quite some time in my Fire Knight team. She has a 2x hitter on the A2, and her A1 actually has a chance of placing a decreased speed, and it also has a chance of decreasing the target's turn meter by 15%, so she can bring you heals and revives and all those sorts of good things. So Syl will be absolutely fantastic. Worst case scenario, you could run her. Another fantastic option is going to be Yakarl the Scourge. Everybody can get this guy, of course, from the clan shop, so there's not really an excuse not to have him. Essentially just, farm out the clan gold and then go ahead and purchase him. He has a freeze on the A1, but his A2 has a 100% chance of placing a freeze, as well as a decreased speed. It also steals 100% of the target's turn meter and places an increased speed on him for 3 turns, and then it ignores defense if they're under a freeze debuff. So obviously we're not going to be getting the freezes on the Fire Knight, but you can certainly use him for control through the waves. And of course, Fire Knight, when you're farming late game, if you're using on Fire Knight hard, you're actually going to end up using your Carl in there as well. Your Carl made it into my team for quite some time because of his freezes, right? So essentially Fire Knight hard, if you're unfamiliar, you need to place freezes instead of turn meter reduction. Freezes are how the Fire Knight's turn meter gets reduced. Another huge call out here, and another strategy you can use, is somebody like a Ferric in the Fat. The reason being is he has an ally attack, so everybody else is going to go in and attack that Fire Knight. And if you think about the fact that we have multiple hitters on basically all of our A1s for this particular team, right, they're going to basically just take down that shield before the Fire Knight even gets, a single turn, right, or before anybody else takes a turn. So essentially just build him fast, have him go in and do the ally attack, and he's great for boosting your damage as well too. The last thing we'll go over here in the video is the AI preset. So if you want to take a look at that, I did actually forget to mention it. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this is set up here. You don't necessarily need to mess with the AI. I was able to do it fully on auto. This is how Ruella looks. So she is going to open with her A2 on wave 2, but then she's not going to use it again until wave 3, in which case it's a first priority, but we do have an opener on her A1. Bellower is essentially just, free to do whatever he wants. Not is essentially just going to go ahead and open with the A1, or his default skill on wave 3, just so he gets the multiple hits. Apothecary is for the most part free to do what he wants, except he's going to save the speed increase, and he's going to open with the speed increase on the Fire Knight, of course. And in Cold Heart, she has her Heart Seeker turned off for wave 2, and then she has a Heart Seeker priority for wave 3 with her A2 Art of Pain being turned off, and of course an opener on Flurry of Arrows. Now, if you want, you can leave her A2 turned on. I would not personally recommend it, especially if you're running her with masteries or skill, or gear rather, that decreases her cooldowns, right? That's why I have it turned off, is because I want all those, cooldown reduction effects to go into the Heart Seeker so that she can cycle around as quick as possible. Now, this same team setup can be used for any team that you might be throwing in here. So, for example, if you're running a Newt, set them up probably the same as your Cold Heart, right? If you're running somebody like, a Allure, set them up basically the same as somebody like a Ruella, with the only exception being you'd turn off the other skills and then just leave the A1 being what it is. That being said, hopefully this is a little bit more helpful than just coming in here and looking at these teams of the week that showcase some absolutely ridiculous teams and don't really help the average player. Make sure to leave a comment down below if there's a particular area of the game that you're struggling and need assistance with, or if you're just looking for some tips or tricks to get through a certain area of the game, right? I'll probably be doing a video again like this at some point in the future on my free-to-play account once that account actually hits it, and I'll show you how I beat it. We don't have too much for epic or legendary champions on that account yet, so it'd be very, very cool to see how I'm able to strategize and get through that content. That being said, as always, I'll see you guys in the next video.